Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Matthew Grant here. It's August, half the world is on holiday, and maybe you are too lying by the pool or on the beach. But we've had some sun here in London, so things aren't too bad, and things are looking up for your podcast too. Now, Robin Merttens was feeling particularly upbeat when we were catching up last week, so I grabbed the moment, fired up the microphone, and we recorded another Partners podcast. Now, it's been a few months since we did one, and a few of you have been saying you quite like them. So why not? And, well, other podcast hosts seem to spend their entire time talking to themselves, so it doesn't hurt a bit to turn the Rodecaster pod mic on ourselves from time to time. Now, if you've been following the Partners podcast over the years, you'll know that we do occasionally stray into territory that may involve themes around adult content, violence to small furry animals, and other sensitive areas. So if you are of a sensitive disposition yourself, then stand by to cover your ears or just turn off now. You've been warned, and this one is no exception. Robin, we haven't done one of these Partners chats for a while. People keep asking why not. So it's our chance to let people listen in to our Friday morning catch-up.
It was pretty good this end. It's Friday. We've had a British summer at long last. Roses in the fridge. No meetings this afternoon. What's not to like?
I'm getting a bit worried because you did a fantastic article this week. We've got a lot to celebrate. We're going to talk a bit about that, about the convergence and acceptance of mainstream insurance for innovation and technology. But the bit that worried me is you said you're actually as happy as you've ever been. And I think part of what people like to hear from you is when actually you call things out as you are. So I hope you're not going to be just like so happy and full of the summer of love. We're not really going to get anything gritty on this conversation.
Oh, I think you can rely on me. It's a mood swing, Matthew. It's a mood swing. I've just happened to be sitting out in the sunshine thinking about how wonderful everything was. And out came this article. Actually, it's really nice, as all Europeans seem to head to the beach to get some thinking and some writing time. And I forgot quite how much I enjoy writing if the mood takes me. And it's an observation that I feel quite strongly about, which is, having been in the space for 20 odd years, there's never been a better alignment of interests between what technology innovators are providing, what the technology does, and what insurance companies and MGAs and brokers are after. And it just makes my life a whole lot easier to be evangelizing and promoting things which the industry really wants.
And I think you're rather modest about not calling out some of what I think is both correlation and causation. That it was 9 years ago InsTech started, and finally it's happening. So I think you do deserve a slight pat on the back. But I also have another theory about why you're happy, because there is now another generation of the Merttens gene in the world. You've become a grandfather since we last had one of these sessions. So I suspect that's also probably making you feel quite good about it.
Oh, for sure. It's been a marvelous experience. And you join a whole new club and you get back to a total loss of control of your own life. For a long period, children had left home. I was able to do what I want. Now my diary is dictated by babysitting duties and picking people up and generally returning to days of yore. But I wouldn't swap it for the world. It's been an absolute revelation. Great fun. And you might be right. It gives you a whole new uplift, a sort of more positive outlook on life. It's definitely been a big influence.
Congratulations, and to the extended Merttens family. But there must be something that's getting you back up. I can't believe that life is just completely perfect just now.
Oh, no. That article was, it's time I wrote something nice. There are plenty of things that get my back up, and maybe because there's been such an outpouring of outrage about how nice I'm being that I might have to find some sort of antidote. Nothing gets on my goat more than procurement. It gets steadily worse. You experience as much as I do. More and more people get procurement departments. It's difficult now to imagine a world where there wasn't a purchase order number. It seems to me now that we can't move without a purchase order number, and we wait months for them, and therefore months to get paid. But I was cheered by something that we got from a bunch of consultants when we were doing procurement this year, who sent us this in the form. This is one of their questions, which I'm foisting on you now, Matthew, see how you answer it. Can you please confirm that your company is not engaged in any of the following industries? Cryptocurrency, in the current environment where cryptocurrency and digital tokens are unregulated, gaming and gambling, narcotics, And in this case, narcotics refers to the industry dealing with marijuana, cannabis, or similar substance legalized in a jurisdiction for medical or recreational use. And pornography. And this was as if I needed to know what pornography was. Magazines, writings, photographs, and other material which are sexually explicit and intended to cause arousal. I haven't asked the team, but I tick none. I hope that's right. Matthew, is it?
Well, speaking personally, I lead a very dull life. So I guess that's the payback for a dull life is we're still allowed to work with these large consultants. And I guess you've got no slaves either. I think it's another question that procurement people like to ask.
So what's happening in your world? Let's start with the US, because one of the big features of the whole year was that you and I spent more time there. We did some events there. We were helped in doing that by Google. Do you think the same dynamic that I talked about in the article of an alignment of interest between what's happening in tech and what's happening in insurance applies there as well?
Yes, although I don't think there's such a barrier before. I think the reasons why it hadn't evolved were slightly different in the US and in the UK. And I think it's more to do with size. And there's a podcast we'll talk about in a minute coming out with Paul Carroll, who writes for Insurance Thought Leadership. He was formerly the Wall Street journalist covering technology, and that included writing about IBM. In fact, he even wrote a book about IBM, and we have a really interesting discussion about it. And to some extent, you can understand where all these legacy technologies come from, because IBM was so motivated to go and sort of sell that technology, and the industry's struggling with that. So I'd say both in the sense of, yes, it's had problems, but actually there's an increasing awareness of the need to solve it. We had 2 excellent events, and of course, thanks to Nigel Walsh and his colleagues at Google for allowing us to use their space. We had some really good sessions from US underwriters talking what their colleagues need and what they've been tasked to go and do in their jobs. And as you allude to in your article, innovation is no longer going out and finding the next blockchain or sort of personal line solution. It's much more about how do you make life a sort of efficient, and sometimes it can be a bit boring, but actually it's a really core area. So yeah, definitely happening in the US, but I think the barriers are still there to actually implement this. What were your reactions from that?
I really enjoyed them. There's a enthusiasm and an openness and a candor that makes doing events really good fun. But it's very rare for you to hear insurers in the UK admit to being hopeless at something, whereas I think there's a willingness to discuss the issues in the US, which I found great. I think, by the way, and this may get us into terrible trouble, certainly in the area of specialty insurance, P&C, when it gets slightly more complex, the UK market is ahead of the US market. And I think that's part of the appeal of companies like Send and Cytora, Hyperexponential, that have tech that clearly has applications in the US and which the US insurers are finding very interesting. It's quite fun for us to sit in the kind of nexus between the UK and the US and see the difference between the two markets and be able to kind of guide a little bit on what we're seeing that's hot, which might apply to the US. And actually, of course, the other way around. There's plenty of terrifically good US companies who are spending more and more time in the UK with their applications for the more complex market.
No surprise that the UK has got more experience of handling specialty insurance, because the US give us all the risks they don't want to write through their admitted carriers in the US. So I think the UK has probably had more experience of working with those messy risks. The one other thing I'd add, actually, the feedback from that event, I got pretty consistently, I'm sure you did, is people like the sort of shorter time on stage. We've actually intentionally done that for the last 8 years now. Had 10 minutes people on stage, 15 minutes to the most. People like these sort of quick fire, get straight to the point discussions, as opposed to slightly longer ones where, frankly, you can sort of lose the point a little bit. So I think we should also celebrate. We took a little bit of British brevity to the US market, and it seemed to go down well.
Yeah, I mean, you could say a lot in 10 minutes. I think the fact that it concentrates people into thinking about the important things that they want to say in 10 minutes, you get something of the sort of greatest hits. You get a single rather than a full album. US makes me think about hurricanes, cat risk. We had Beryl, earliest cat event that there's ever been. Matthew, how's the market responded to that and your RMS days and your knowledge of this space and the people who help in it? Any observations?
A fascinating time. So it's the earliest Category 5 hurricane to make landfall in recorded history. So Category 5 is the top end of the scale for hurricanes. It made landfall in the Caribbean, and actually was Category 1 when it made landfall on the US mainland. So what's really interesting about that whole area, and we saw this with the event that we did last week supported by RIASC and Eigenrisk, talking about how some of the more sophisticated insurance companies are thinking about modeling hurricane losses. And of course, we all know that climate change and climate variability, which is not quite the same as necessarily mankind-driven climate change, but there's a lot of variation in the frequency of hurricanes. And interesting, in your article, you talk about the fact that underwriters using real-time data from IoT in buildings hasn't really taken off. But what we are seeing happening is people getting more sophisticated about using more reliable sources of data for shorter term hurricane forecasting, or even things like flood, where companies like Provisico are doing early warning for floods. But what we're hearing now is that companies such as Inigo, Apollo, Securus, which is they run cat bonds, Vave, we know, of course, know very well, they're all tapping into new data and actually employing PhDs who've got a lot of experience in the sort of understanding of hurricane formation to work out what is happening in the next couple of weeks. And you get really interesting things like where you get dust bowls in the Sahara that actually dampen down hurricane activity. So what these companies are doing is they're actually feeding that into their forecast. Every day they're making a decision based on what the hurricane risk could be right now. So Securus, who's trading cat bonds, they need to price it real time based on what the hurricane risk is today. And for companies like Vave, where they're offering insurance coverage, they basically turn off the underwriting where it automatically turns itself off. So you can't get somebody that's sneakily trying to buy hurricane insurance for their property when it's right in the path of a hurricane making landfall. And what's encouraging about it is those catastrophe models are good up to a point, and they do a very good job of actually estimating loss when you know what the wind speed is. But they're intentionally not designed to look forward for climate change, because that's a whole different area. And what we're seeing now is these companies are evolving to actually take the core catastrophe models and then add on to that the view of risk that different companies might have different views on, but make it much more dynamic. And I think this is the first season we've seen that really happening. Again, like every industry has its early movers and early adopters, and we're definitely seeing that happening now. And I think as the hurricane season progresses, we're going to start to see who's in control of their exposures and aggregates, because they've got a good handle on what is happening in the next 2 weeks with hurricanes.
Is there a parametric angle to that? It's an area where people are engaging with us, seeking our help. But do you see that as part of the solution to these sort of more dynamic approaches?
Definitely. I mean, we talk about this in the parametric post that's going out this week. I made the point there that it's not often that insurers celebrate making a payout, but parametric insurance, of course, relies on the fact it does actually pay out after a loss. And whilst Beryl didn't have much significant damage, I mean, it did have quite a lot of damage actually in billions of dollars, but in the scale of normal catastrophes in the whole of the US, it wasn't that big. But in other parts of the Caribbean, there were some pretty significant losses. The Caribbean Fund, through the Natural Disaster Fund, paid out up to $40 million for different Caribbean islands from this. And there's various other parametric covers that have been paid out. So at some point, insurers are not going to want to celebrate keep paying out parametric losses, particularly if they've got it wrong and overestimated. But it's encouraging to see that happening. Jonathan Gonzalez from Raincoat, who we know well, he actually started his business because his mother didn't get a payout when a hurricane made landfall in Puerto Rico, and he was so incensed that he actually said, there must be a better way of doing this, and has designed a business. So insurers need to have the demonstration for lots of reasons, credit being one of them, but also a structure they can pay out. And parametric insurance now is proving that there's a coverage that wouldn't have been there beforehand. So yes, I think that is another big measure of success in that space that we can celebrate. And I've got a question for you, Robin, on a sort of different theme. Thing we're seeing happening quite a lot now is funding. So last year was a bit of a dark year for anybody trying to raise money, but both you and I get contacted quite a lot by people on both sides of the equation, people looking to invest in companies and people looking to raise funds. But what's been crossing your desk recently that you can share in terms of funding activity?
There's a lot of activity. There's a return to quality. What I mean by that is the number of decks that we see where you look at it and go, actually, that's a really cool idea, I'll tell so-and-so about that, is far greater than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I think the activity has returned across the entire spectrum. So there's certainly early stage money returning again. The corporate venture capital is still very active for those who still have expertise there. What I like is that there are 2 or 3 early stage companies seeking seed money that haven't yet got going, or basically have a tech stack and no customers. They've raised often £1 to £2 million, $2-3 million. That's quite a lot of money for a really early stage company, and that was absolutely impossible 2 or 3 years ago. And of course, up at the other end, those who've ridden this Insurtech, Trough, who have proven businesses, proven management expertise, and a clear sight at profitability, are raising again, and the valuations seem to be pretty good and pretty fair to me. So I think across the board, it's an encouraging signs. And I don't think we said that last time we had a partners podcast. I think the environment looks fundamentally more optimistic and sensible than it's been for quite a long time.
I'm just thinking we should do a compilation of gloomy bits from the Partners podcast, because I've certainly got lots of gloomy views on funding. Either companies that should not have been funded because they were just ridiculous, and that was the, shall we say, uneducated capital coming in from outside of insurance, or companies that should have been funded and didn't get it. On that point about seed funding, what's also really interesting is seeing how the sort of angel network are stepping up for really significant amount, hundreds of thousands in some cases, of investment in these companies. And those are often people who've made some money in insurance, made quite a lot of money in insurance. They're reinvesting it back in the industry, and they like what they see, and they know what good looks like. So I think that's very encouraging for lots of reasons. And also Series A, Series B, Series C, as you said, at Series C, you've got to be making money really at that stage. And so you can read between the lines when some of these companies are actually getting to their next funding round, that they're now making money and are a proper company. They're not just burning through all their investment capital. I'm really looking forward to the podcast I got lined up with Marcus Rue, who is the founder of Guidewire, now at Battery Ventures. He was one of the people behind the $73 million investment in Hyper Exponential. Just such an amazing story. And he himself has got a really useful perspective on investing, from somebody who started a company himself and had to go out and raise funds. So lots to celebrate. I think you, like I, we get people approaching us with offers of investment. It's always very flattering that people think I can spend $100,000 or £100,000 in a company. Not really what I'm looking to do right now, but it does give us a little bit of a personal visibility as well into what's coming, as well as, of course, people we know personally who are looking to raise funds for their company. So, I think watch this space for everybody.
I think partly, Matthew, it's your lifestyle. My wine collection probably doesn't help much either. People assume that if you can have a wine collection like that, you have vast amounts of money hanging around. Well, not after you've bought all that wine, you don't. No, it is nice to be asked, but £100,000 is well above my threshold. There is a relationship between these things. They're back to the summer of love. There's money in the industry now. People have made profits for several years. It's still set pretty fair that they are choosing for the first time in a while to reinvest that money in making themselves better at providing insurance. And I think there are therefore people in the industry who've had good bonuses, whose careers coming near the end, who's prepared to put money back in. And as you say, something backed by a industry grandee who has a good following and has made money is worth a lot more than something that the grandees don't get behind. And that's become a thing, that it really has. As has this whole issue of, I don't think we spend more time on anything else other than in the whole area of partnerships, collaboration. I'm going to do it again, ecosystems. It is clear that if you are providing a pricing capability, that you need to think about how your relationships with, say, workflow tools or underwriter workbenches, the ways in which these things are starting to come together. Data ingestion meets underwriter workbenches meets pricing, where your modeling fits into that. Hardly a day goes past now without some partnership announcement between these various people. And I know you're seeing that too in your sort of modeling and data world.
It's also quite complicated. Partnerships, as we know, I think many people know, when you do a partnership, you've really got to find a way to make it work quite early. I say what's encouraging here is part of it, but it's actually also just facilitating the integrations. Your square plug goes in a square hole, your round plug goes in a round hole, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a whole bunch of work to enable the partnership. It's just that there's a common theme, common standards, that good use of APIs means it works together. So I think the combination of, yes, more active partnerships, but just the way that the data flows through the insurance journey, it makes it all a lot easier. And again, back to our earlier discussion, but I think we're seeing more of that coming out of the UK, driven by the specialty market, than we are anywhere else in the world.
I can see at some point, and it's not that far away, you'll be able to set up a greenfield site, perhaps Bermuda, and have a whole insurance technology capability in a box. At the moment, you have to go out and pick your modules, and that's been the preference for a long time. And I can easily see that if you're an incumbent or with a certain amount of legacy, then you're building around your core. But imagine being able to set up a reinsurer up Bermuda and raise a whole bunch of risk capital and go straight out and buy a whole, or your technology requirement in a box, which has every bit of technology you want and it all glued together. We know that there are plenty of people working on that. That would be very cool. And the ability to be up and running with fully digitally enabled very quickly will put a certain pressure on those who are not able to compete quite so effectively.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you also then can get that set up. You do it well, and you can then go and, I guess from Bermuda you can sit on the beach quite easily. But in theory, you should be able to get that thing running and not have to interfere with it too much, and need less people to run it. You are becoming the expert, slightly in the world of the blind. The one-eyed man is king, but on algorithm and smart follow. And if anybody ever wonders the difference between augmented and algorithm, you're the person to go to. Is that now got to the point where it's being recognized as a distinct category in its own right, or are we not quite there yet?
I don't know. It's got a little bit of the teenage sex about it, by which I mean everybody's talking about it, and I'm not sure how many people are actually doing it. A lack of knowledge in the space still troubles me greatly. Everybody, one, around the nomenclature, and I'm sure everybody really understands the difference between truly algorithmic and then augmented and then smart follow, fast follow. There are lots of words being bandied around as if somehow they're all closely related. I see them as fundamentally different things. Where we're heading, I think, in this space is, one, algorithms are going to creep into more and more decisioning. And you can see where we started out, which was triaging. So a simple algorithm would just say, is this something we like or we don't like? We'll move up now into, this is something we like, but there are aspects of it we don't like, which we've highlighted here for you, the underwriter, to take a look at. To fully, we like these, we follow this underwriter, we like this type of risks, just follow it automatically and it's bound. And at some stage, as we would for our motor insurance in the UK, fully algorithmic. What is clear is that into the SME and now into the mid-market space in the commercial UK, that is becoming fully algorithmic. And I just think this creeps and creeps and creeps. I know everyone says, well, a bit of cultural issues, the human will always win. Of course, that's right. But this is a fact of our lives, that there will be more and more aid in the decision-making process, which gets very close to the algo making a decision for you. The reason why I think it's going to be a big feature of what we talk about in 2025 is just the big gap between what it is and the underlying knowledge of how you make it happen, and what you need to do with your data, your knowledge of your data, your ability to sort out your historical data, the codification of risk, the codification of appetite. We're a long way from fully understanding the implications of all this and being able to implement. That's just like big drag between appetite and ability right now, which the industry is going to have to solve quite quickly, I think.
That's actually a really profound comment, your point about people now understand what needs to get done, but they just don't know how to do it. It's a little bit like why it's taken 9 years for people to start listening to you and I about the need for more innovation in insurance. There's a period of probably 3 or 4 years ago where I'd say the people making decisions and spending money in insurance companies realize you need to do something. And then the really hard bit is actually, how do you do it? Rather like what characterizes a good founder of a company, you need both the vision and then you have to go out and execute on the vision. And they're actually two really different things, which is why it's really hard to run a successful company. That is part of our themes for next year. Your 10 questions to solve really for next year. Now, on the back of our Google events, I've got the confidence to be doing larger events next year. But the highlight of the year, I know for you, is coming the end of this year. And it comes back to your point about wine. And I'm just going to use a little story you told me, Robin, just to blow your cover on this, because I think it's a good story. You explained to me that the trick is to create this persona of someone who really cares about wine, so that people always buy you really good wine. You don't actually have to buy really good wine yourself, and you're always very good at finding good wines at a good price. So I'm sorry if I've blown your cover, but I think that is a tremendous bit of advice to anybody in their early years, is adopt a persona of someone who really appreciates good wine, so that people don't fob you off with the cheap stuff. But back to our event, just give us a little bit of a preview of what's happening for our invitation-only event, which I think someone described it, it's the event that grown-ups turn up to of all the events we do.
It's by far the most talked about event we ever do. It goes all the way back to the days of the pandemic, and a very fun night we had, sitting in the middle of depths of some cold night, with lots of people online comparing their favorite wines. And then everyone says, you've got to do something in the real world. The key to this is to create some incredibly tenuous connection between wine and insurance technology. So this year, it's all about blending, ingesting, and enjoying, which applies as much to technology as it does to wine. And I'm very pleased to say that EY and PKF Little John, among others, have got behind us. One of the things which I'm most looking forward to is I think we might be one of the earliest tasters of John Needham, partner at PKF Little John, his new Blanc de Noir, which comes from grapes grown in Suffolk and is made under the arches in Battersea. So he's going to bring that wine along. That'll be one of the many interesting, unusual, and innovative things that we do that night.
I think we should also give recognition to Todd Rissell in that COVID wine tasting when it was fine for all of us, 4:00 in the afternoon, breaking up a bottle of wine. Todd, dialing in from the East Coast in the US, 11:00 in the morning, was very game about joining us for wine tasting. Todd continues to be a great supporter of InsTech. I think we're looking for one or two more. We'll take one more country to be represented. Is there any specific country that you feel hasn't had the appropriate level of coverage in our previous events, and you've encouraged somebody for not very much, but really the cost of the wine, isn't it, to supply the wine for that night if they've got a kind of regional allegiance? So
I'm looking at ideally countries that blend brilliant wine, and one area we never really featured properly is South Africa. I'd love to have, and there's some really good tech companies working in South Africa. I'd love to feature them, South Africa. And then somebody told me the other day the wines of China are emerging. Now, I'm not sure whether or not we could bring ourselves to have Chinese wine. But if there's anyone out there who knows about Chinese wine and wants to promote Chinese wine at our event, they'd be very welcome.
For their wine.
Just for their wine, yeah. So that's us. What do we haven't talked about? We haven't talked about podcasts, Matthew. How are your podcasts going, or our podcasts going? Are we still holding our own in the podcast world? It seems to me that's one of those areas where more and more people are podcasting. What are you seeing?
Yeah, more competition. I get grumpy listening to other people's podcasts from insurance because either they're really good and I get jealous, or they're really not very good. And I think this is such a waste of time. How can someone dare pollute the podcasting atmosphere with such rubbish? So that's my rant. No, I mean, based on what people tell us, I think they're going really well. We did a poll at our event last week, and it's always slightly dangerous extrapolating from a sample of 200 people. But yeah, we had 9% of people in the room listen to the podcast every Sunday, and 75% of people have listened to at least one podcast. And I was glad that actually quite a small number had only listened to one podcast. So that's not bad. If you think we get people turning up to the event, they've listened to podcasts. I mean, you and I quite often come across people and you say, have you heard of InsTech? And they go, well, of course I have. I listen to your podcast quite regularly. We do try very hard to keep it for the lay people. I mean, anybody listening to this has probably listened to other podcasts. We don't need to bang on about it too much. We are expanding more into the US, as I sort of hinted at. The Paul Kyle one is going to be fantastic. And yeah, whilst we tend to favor members for our podcast, because let's face it, you and I need to get paid to live, we are on the lookout for other really interesting people. I'd be careful to suggest our members are not interesting. Other really interesting people with stories to tell relevant to insurance and the broader concept. So if anybody's listening, got a recommendation for somebody they feel is a really great person to get on a podcast and would like to introduce us, we're always open to that. But as I said, we do have to give slight priority in time to our members just because we pay the bills.
I think what you just said there reflects into our events too. A lot of people come along, they're our front of house. We find more and more competition. I was thinking more and more people imitating is probably too strong a word, but I mean, who cares if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery? But you could see a move to smaller events. There's room for these big events, but more and more people are attracted to specialist subjects. It's better to have 50 people in a really good networking event on a really tight subject, or maybe do an evening event with 200, 300 people in the room. But I think people have worked out that it's about the quality of the people in the room and the quality of the content, not the number of people in the room and the number of sponsors. And I think people probably could work out for themselves the difference between investor-backed companies that make their money from events, don't perhaps have the same sense of community. You and I have always been driven by this desire to link people up, to be a dating agency, to have a sense of community, bringing people together and to promote good tech.
I mean, that community one is very important, isn't it? And again, I generally have a spectrum of views on things, but it's another area I'm a little bit like binary on. I feel with the community, there are people that either are great community players and will support the community and give back. And there are other people who just don't get it. You sort of realize, you and I, over the time that we just have to support the people that support the rest of the world and just recognize not everyone's got the same values as us and let them get on with their own thing. And as we know, these are really hard to organize. A lot goes on behind the scenes to make what looks like a sort of fairly easy, fun, flowing evening. And I just call out, because we're coming up for renewal again, that when the Chartered Insurance Institute reviews us for continual professional development, which is a really rigorous process, by the way, one of the things they called out is they like the humor of our events. So we've got to probably maintain that happy place you're in, which is probably a good place to end, actually. You started off in your summer of love, so maybe that's where we should wrap it up, but not forget to sort of channel that into our events going forward, because that actually was what gives us the accreditation for people to use the score as part of their own professional development.
We should probably touch quickly on our plans for 2025, when I'm talking already about 2025, because we're lucky enough to just about have sold out all our events for 2024 now, which is sign of the times. Let me just quickly pick out my highlights and the reason why I think my Summer of Love may go on. We're doing 3 events in the US next year. We love them so much that we want to go back. We might go beyond New York, look at doing something in Boston, Chicago as well. The big themes for 25, if I was to call them, we've touched on most of them here. Algorithms insurance, I think, will be something that stays throughout the 12 months. Claims is back in the headlights. A lot of what's been learned in the retail sector is coming across to the specialty sector, I think. Your cat and climate theme, that's not going anywhere fast. And then that whole ecosystems, partners, I don't know what you'd call it, they're going to be the big driving forces, I think. And then I'd love to spend some time more on the sort of what's cool in the US coming to the UK, cool in the UK going to the US. I think that's probably an area to focus on too. There's quite a lot to look forward to in all that. I think we've ever been busier. Don't expect me to get really grumpy and gloomy anytime soon.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear the Summer of Love is not likely to turn into the winter of discontent. And talking about grumpy, as we're recording this, it's just about to come up to noon, which means we're into Friday afternoon. So I know that is definitely the time that we pull the plug and let you go and do what you like to do on a Friday afternoon.
Done. Look forward to it. Matthew, pleasure to chat as always.
Have a good weekend.
Was that a bit of a rant? No, it wasn't. It wasn't too bad.
Well done for making it this far. Normal service will be resumed next week, and we've got some excellent guests. By the way, if you didn't catch the one with Paul Carroll last week or a couple of weeks ago, then check that out. Really worth listening to. And as I said, you've got some really great people turning up soon. Of course, you can find out what we're up to, www.instech.co. Look out for our wine tasting event coming up later this year, and back to the normal sequence of events. And if you want some help from us helping you make the world a better place and make some money, contact any one of us, hello@instech.co. And if you want to spend some money with us, or memberships, events, or getting great content, even better. That's it. We're done.